Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So in this video I'm going to be planting up my winter bedding plants to replace the summer bedding, which will soon be finished. So this is my front garden. I recently made these beds just a few months ago, so all the plants in here are quite recent. Now there's a thin strip on the edge here which I'll be replacing soon with some cast concrete just to widen the drive. But apart from that, this is pretty much the final state of the beds, and these are a few weeds that have sprung up, but I've let them grow because they've got quite nice flowers and they'll keep going until the frost comes, so it'll probably only last another week or two. So the plan is to plant up quite a few new bedding plants. So this is the selection I've got this year. Normally I go for violas just because they're a little bit tougher than pansies, but this year I've gone for pansies just to see how they cope with the wind. Now when it comes to temperature, pansies and viola, they like very similar growing conditions, cool weather. They can handle quite hard frost as well. They just won't flower when the hard frosts are around, but they won't die. So it's pretty similar growing conditions. The only thing is the leaves are a bit bigger and the flowers are much larger, so if you do have strong winds, the winds tend to shred the pansy flowers much more easily than the viola flowers. So I'll see how they do. These violas are going to be at ground level, they're not going to be in pots or on a balcony, so I'm hoping they might be okay. But we do have quite strong storms here in Scotland, so it'll just be an experiment, see how they do. So the idea is most of the bedding will be this on the actual beds. I've got some plants such as these cosmos over there. You can see there's a bit more like specimen plants in the middle of the bed. So to replace them, I've got a mixture of Cineraria, I've got some wallflower, and I've also got some of my own seed-grown ornamental kale plants. So these are the ornamental kale plants that are grown from seed. These should go a lovely nice bright purple colour once the colder weather arrives. Whilst they're a bit younger and the weather's still quite mild, they tend to have the more green coloured leaves, but they should get a lot more colourful once the colder weather comes. So these will be planted out as well. I had wanted them to be a lot bigger by this stage in the year because the next month or so is going to be quite cool, the growth will be quite slow, so they won't get much size before winter arrives. And once winter does arrive, they're not going to grow at all, they'll just sit dormant, but they'll still look quite nice. So they're a bit smaller than I had hoped because I couldn't get the seeds. They were all sold out of stock, so I got them later than I had hoped. And you can see I actually have a couple of caterpillars on here as well. That's another issue with the kale, is they tend to attract a lot of the cabbage white butterflies, and their caterpillars devastate the leaves. So this has been a combination of caterpillar damage on this and also slug and snail damage. So that's something I have to watch out for as well. Part of the reason I'm not planting them outside quite yet because I need to have them in a slightly more sheltered position where I control the pests, but they still manage to get in. So I need to keep an eye on these when they're actually in the ground because they could still get decimated by them. So they'll probably be going as a replacement to some of these cosmos. As with the wallflowers will grow up to a nice height and flower in spring. They won't be flowering in autumn at all. And then I've also got the Cineraria as well. This one here, lovely silvery foliage. Not sure what I'm doing with that yet. That might go into this pot up here with my Ensete banana trees. I'm not too sure yet. I'll decide later on. Basically the Ensete bananas are still looking good, so I won't be getting rid of them quite yet, but I'll definitely need to get rid of them in about a week or two once the colder weather arrives. So also in this update, I'd like to give you an update on my sunflowers. These are probably going to be destroyed later this week. I'm going to try and stake them as best I can with bamboo canes and twine, but the winds are going to be picking up. First the winter storm is going to roll in and these will probably get destroyed by them. So give you a quick update. They're basically about 3 or 4 meters in height now. The one right at the end up there I believe is close to 4 meters, and the other ones here are about 3 meters in height. A sense of scale, the height of that door is about probably about 2.4 meters, 2.5 meters in height, so you can see that's the kind of scale. So these would keep going until the frosts. They're looking quite good at the moment. The frosts are probably going to kill them in about a month's time. These can handle a light frost. The Ensete bananas, the frost will probably kill them in a week or two. Depends on the weather really. But some of them are flowering quite nice. That's this one over here has flowered a little bit earlier, maybe because it's next to the house, I'm not sure. But the idea with these sunflowers is I'm trying to breed a bigger and bigger one every year, multi-branched as well. The one that's done best so far this year is probably this one, although it got damaged by the wind, so it's starting to suffer now. It's actually snapped at the base, so it's leaning and the whole stem isn't transporting the water, so whenever it's sunny this tends to wilt. But this has got the most branched appearance and looking really quite good. Another contender which I'll keep seeds from is that one on the far left, which is only just coming into flower now. That one is the tallest so far, but it's a lot less branched, so it doesn't have the perfect genetics. So I'll try and collect some of that one. Maybe if it will cross with the children of this plant next year, might get a good combination of lots of branching and also very tall. So I'll show you now the plants I've got planted up at the moment. So a lot of the Kale I might put in a semicircle round about where these gladioli are. I need to do a bit of weeding, but this was planted up with kale last year and it looked particularly good. And as for the main beds, that'll be more wallflowers and Cineraria. I need to replace some of these plants such as the cosmos. The frost will kill them soon and they're actually starting to die with the mildew already. You can see that's why they've got this silvery colour to the leaf. That's mildew attacking them. And these have been suffering recently with the cooler temperatures and it's been quite damp as well. The mildew set in, it's starting to kill off these cosmos plants, so they'll need replaced. I've actually lost one completely. This one's almost dead. There was one over there which completely died, but you can see generally they're not looking too great and they're starting to die off, so I'll be taking them out today. The pelargoniums here, they've really started to grow well recently. These are much more tolerant at cold temperatures. They can probably take -2 until they're really damaged, so I'll leave these right until the harder frosts. I'll probably be replacing these in a month or so, but I'll get at least a month of colour out of these. Although these plants won't survive the winter, -1, -2 is normally fine, so I'll leave them until the first sign of hard frost and then I'll replace them. So I'm just going to plant around them at the moment, and later in the year, once my spring bulbs arrive, I will be planting up a lot of spring bulbs in this as well to give a display in springtime. I'm hoping to make a video about that later on, so I'll leave a link once that's available. And then the other plants that need replaced are my 2 Cinetes. These flowered great. These were really looking good in spring. They gave a nice flower in early autumn. I've just cut them back again and they're just gone back to the leaf stage. So these always flower about twice a year for me, but these need to come out because these can't take much frost either. -1, -2 and they'll be killed, so I'll replace them. And as for the other plants, I've got things such as the ricinus plants here. These I'm just going to leave for now, but these will be replaced by trees in winter time. I've got some bare root trees arriving, so that's why I'm going to keep these just until the frost kills them. Also, they look particularly nice. I've got a few of them. They do look quite good at the moment, so it would be a shame to remove them. But these should last until the frost. They seem to be quite wind resistant, which is good, so I think they'll survive the storm that's coming. I might stake them though, just to be sure, but they should be fine. So what I'll do now is I'll start planting up and I'll show you how it looks once it's all planted. So that's it now, mostly planted up. You can see I've got a few plants left. These I'll be saving for the 2 whiskey barrel planters where the Ensetes are at the moment, and also maybe 1 or 2 other plant plots as well. But that's the vast majority of the pansies planted up, and quite a lot of the wallflowers as well. But as you can see, it's not too obvious from a distance. I think with having the wood chip mulch, it kind of makes all the plants blend in. Also, they're a bit swamped and the plants are quite small. But there is actually a lot of pansies all along here. I think there's about 40 in total that I put in. I've also kind of alternated them with some of the ornamental kale over there. And then I'll put these wallflowers as a bit like a specimen plant just in the middle, because they'll grow quite tall, especially come late spring. So one of the things to bear in mind when you're doing winter bedding like this is you want to plant it at the right time. So when it comes to autumn, winter bedding and spring bedding, it's generally all the same kind of plants, unless you live in a country where it gets really cold in winter time. But even here, -10, -15, most of these plants should be fine. -20 might be pushing it a bit though. So with things like violas and other plants like that, you really need to time it well. These won't do well in hot conditions, so you want to wait until the last of the heat is gone from your summer. But you want to plant them before you get the really hard frosts and before it gets too cold and cloudy for the plants to grow well. So I'm planting mine in the middle of September. Here in Scotland I would normally try and plant them beginning of September, end of August if I can, because the weather gets cool quite early here, and then you only have about a month or 2 of moderate growing conditions and they stop growing. But if you're in a warmer climate, you might want to plant them more late September, early October. You basically want at least a month or 2 of reasonable temperatures. So when I say reasonable, I mean about between probably about 0 at night time and about 15 degrees during the daytime. That way these plants will get a chance to grow. If you plant them too late, the problem is they will grow really slow, because if it's too late in the year, the temperatures will be quite low and the growth rate will be incredibly slow, and so they'll just sit at this size all winter. You won't really see them at all, and then in spring they'll take off and grow nicely. But if you can give them that month or 2's growth in the autumn, they'll bulk up, start flowering. They might even keep some of those flowers over winter if you have mild spells, and then when it comes to springtime they'll be a really big, large plant. They'll take off and they'll cover quite a large area. So it's the same with most of these plants. The wallflowers in particular, they're really only biennials, so if you plant them small, you're going to have small plants in spring, but if these grow large over autumn time, you'll have a large flowering display in spring, and these won't flower before spring. So these are really spring bedding plants, but they need to be planted out in autumn time. Violas, they can really be planted year round, but ideally with cooler conditions, so I tend to use them as winter bedding plants. And the ornamental kale as well needs to be a decent size. But what I'll do now, I'm going to give them all a balanced feed just to give them a bit of a kickstart to growth. We don't tend to get any really hard frost until December or January, so even if they put on some fresh growth now, it's not a big issue. They'll be hardened off by the time the coldest weather arrives. But I need to give them that bit of feed just to give them a good head start, so they'll grow well and they get to a good size by winter. And as you can see, there is actually a lot of self-seeded violas from previous plants earlier in the year, so I've left them. They should grow up and look nice. So depending how long this video is, I'll either finish it here or I'll go on to planting up my plant pots where the Ensetes used to be and planting the rest of the bedding plants, especially as some of these plants are going to be quite small, so not very noticeable in this video, but they'll be much more noticeable in 2 or 3 weeks time when they've had some chance to grow. So it's now just over 2 months later, and we did have to wait quite a while this autumn until the winter weather finally arrived. So until about 2 weeks ago it was pretty mild, temperatures well above freezing, and then in the last week or so we've had a really bad storm and it's been consistently temperatures below freezing every night. So winter has finally arrived and I've been able to put away my Ensete and bananas, so ready to plant up the rest of my plants. But before that, I'd like to show you how my other bedding plants are doing since I planted them. So you can see they've certainly bulked up a lot. They're a lot bigger. There's been several flowers. I need to deadhead a few still, but they've generally been flowering quite well. Now it's very dark at the moment this time of year, so the flowering will reduce, but they should all perk up again in spring. And there are several self-seeded ones which are popping up here and there as well, such as this one here that I've left. As you can see, it is slightly frosty at the moment, so I don't want to touch any of the frosted plants because that will damage them. And looking at the rest of the bed, we've got plants such as the wallflowers here. They've bulked up quite nice. And in fact, I'll show you some that I've left in the small pots to give you an indication of how much they've grown. So for example, this one here is one that's been kept in its original container, and you can see how much smaller and weaker it is than the ones that have been out in the ground. So they've really been able to put their roots down and bulk up nicely, and so they're looking a lot better. But these need to be planted out now. So these are really starved for nutrients, that's why they're so small. But these now have some space for me to plant them out into. And the other plants I'd like to give you an update on are the kale plants. Now unfortunately I did plant these too late. As I said before, I had a problem getting the seed. So you can see they're quite small plants. Hopefully they'll come to something by spring. We have had quite a mild autumn, so there's not much colouring yet. You can see some of them are just starting to colour up now. They've been quite slow in colouring up this year because it has been so mild. So the 2 Ensete ventricosums now away. They've been dry stored for the winter. We've had about -2, but this riciness is still just about hanging on. But most of the plants, as you can see, have been completely destroyed by the wind of the storm or the hard frost. We did have the worst winds in about 10 or 20 years, so there was a lot of damage from that. So this is ready now for planting. What I think I'll do, just to get a bit of greenery over the winter and also to insulate the roots from my bamboo plants here, I'm just going to plant them into the centre of the pot. What I will do though is I'm going to keep them inside their original pots so that I can easily take them out again and put them elsewhere next year without disturbing the roots too much. So these will be planted as they are inside their pots. These are ones I grew from seed previously, so there's a bit of variance between the two of them. This is the slightly larger one, and I've also got this slightly smaller one over here. They're looking a bit sorry for themselves at the moment because there was a hard frost earlier in the day, and so they are above freezing now. The temperature's above freezing. I wouldn't normally plant unless temperatures are above freezing. So these leaves will perk up over time, but at least they'll give me a bit of greenery. So my idea is I'll have these bamboo plants in the middle as a kind of like specimen plant to just bring a bit of colour, make it look nice. And then around that I'm just going to finish off with the rest of my bedding plants here. So I'll probably intersperse the Senecio here, also called Cineraria. I'll be interspersing these with what I've got left of the violas. The violas are looking really sorry for themselves. These should perk up though once they're in the soil. They haven't had enough feed and they've not had enough root space, so that's why they're looking so bad. But these will perk up by spring. So they'll be interspersed with the Cineraria, give a nice kind of colour contrast because that's nice and silvery. And then probably towards the back I'll put a few wallflowers in because these are quite tall plants. I'll put them at the back and they should come up above the bamboo next spring, and it should give some nice colour just as spring comes around. So that's the 2 planters now planted up. So these would have looked a bit better if I had planted them up in September, because then they would have had time to grow and fill the pots before the coldest of winter comes. But at least we've got some colour now and some greenery. These are going to sit here, not really do much for the next 2 or 3 months. Winters here in North Scotland are very dark and cold. Nothing grows, even cold hardy plants really. Nothing really grows over December, January and February. But come into next spring, when the weather warms up, these should bulk up quite quickly. I'll then give them a multi-purpose feed to get them boosted with the growth, and then switch to a tomato feed when they start growing. So these should look quite good in spring. As with the rest of the bed, that should also come out quite nice. So this bed should look quite good in spring. Amazingly, this one rose is still clinging on. I don't know why that hasn't been killed by the frost yet, but the other roses have been hit back by the frost, so they'll be ready for pruning soon. I tend to prune them a bit later, because if I prune them now, they tend to start growing again before winter's over and the frost kills the new growth. So that's most of the bed done for now. I'll give you guys an update when the spring bulbs start coming up around the roses in a few months' time. But that's all for now. I'll see you guys in spring when I'll hopefully have the garden full of colour again.